I'm in the beginning of a project, and so I'm very eager to hear all of your thoughts on it. And it comes out of reading Philosophy and Scientific Image of Man with a focus on the original image, which has largely been overlooked. A few people have paid attention to it. But a couple of things struck me a few years ago about it. One is the way he introduces the original image to reveal a fatal flaw in the manifest image, which is that objects in the manifest image are grasped as objects only by grasping them through the categories of personhood and suppressing attributions of agency and intentionality and all such things. Every object in the manifest image is a person devoid of personality, which is, I think, a radical thought. And it's one of the reasons he thinks that we need to grasp the world through the scientific image. We need to get outside of these categories of personhood because we're not going to grasp the world as it really is as long as we're trying to grasp the world through them. Sorry. Oh, thank you so much. And so trying to make sense of that, and where did that, I mean, to make sense of the original image in light of that use of the original image in this paper. And then the second thing that really struck me when I started really paying attention to the function of the original image in the essay is the familiar fact, which he talks about. It's a familiar fact that we move from the original image to the manifest image over the course of human history and prehistory. By familiar fact, he's referring to the work of the first century of the social sciences. He's hugely influenced by Durkheim, apparently, who is a quasi-positivist in the Comtean tradition. And the problem with his reliance on this familiar fact and this development of the manifest image is that it's predicated on a kind of a progress idea. Humans grew out of the childhood of our species when we stopped projecting personhood into the world, seeing spirits everywhere. We matured. And that is no longer a credible idea. Sellars starts that essay by telling us that we need to know our way around the special sciences in doing philosophy, to take a philosophical perspective about how everything hangs together. Thank you so much. And so what I'm trying to do is to do that work again, because the social sciences have moved on from what they had to say in his day. So what happens when we update these ideal types, original image, manifest image, scientific image, in light of what we can learn from the knowing our way around the social sciences today? Okay, hopefully everything will be visible. All right, a bunch of my slides are just this over and over again, except with where I am highlighted, so you know where I am. Hopefully that's helpful. I don't know how to make that box small enough.
Yeah, hi, there you go.
This?
I think so.
Oh, there we go, okay.
You can also close, yeah.
All right. So now I'm mostly going to read. In Philosophy and the Scientific Image of Man, Wilfrid Sellars makes the scientific image the ultimate arbiter of what does and does not exist, assigning it the exclusive role of explaining the world. Yet he also insists that we possess a conceptual framework of persons, and that this framework of concepts related to personhood, agency, intentionality, thought, and belief is what makes human community possible. This framework thus serves a profoundly important function in human social life. Oh, how do I advance?
Just make sure you click on the,
there we go. Sellars writes, the conceptual framework of persons is the framework in which we think of one another as sharing the community intentions which provide the ambience of principles and standards within which we live our own individual lives. On Sellars' account, to take something to be a person is to understand it to be a member or potential member of one's community, and to understand oneself to be, quote, bound up with it in a network of rights and duties. There is a strict division of labor between the scientific image. That's for changing slides?
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah, let's work. We changed the batteries.
That's okay. I can just use the keyboard. Thanks anyway. There's a strict division of labor between the scientific image and the conceptual framework of persons. The scientific image exclusively makes, by the way, conceptual framework of persons is just, on my reading of this essay, the thing that the original image and the manifest image are two versions of. And I think that's a really important aspect of this essay that has often been overlooked. There's a strict division of labor between the scientific image and the conceptual framework of persons. The scientific image exclusively makes factual claims about the patterns in the world, meaning that the discursive use of the conceptual framework of persons only appears to be making factual claims. If I say, I believe you intend to ask me difficult questions during the Q&A, I'm not asserting a fact. Rather, Sellars would say, I am, quote, rehearsing an intention. However, and I don't think Sellars sees this or he doesn't bring it out, this demarcation must cut both ways. The scientific image can tell us all kinds of things about our physiology, our sociality, but it has no authority over the conceptual framework of persons. The scientific image cannot tell us what ought to count as a person or agent because it does not trade in these concepts at all. The ultimate criterion for the propriety of any given scheme for what counts as a person is whether or not it enables our community to thrive. According to Sellars, the conceptual framework of persons has always been with us, but it has changed over time. In what Sellars called the original image, the animistic world inhabited by prehistoric humans, all kinds of things could count as persons, including animals, plants, mountains, rivers, and artifacts. Gradually, humans came to suppress, restrict, and refine the conceptual framework until only humans counted as persons, giving rise to the manifest image, our own familiar everyday experience and understanding of ourselves and our world. Sellars claims that this transition from the original to the manifest image is a, quote, familiar fact, by which he means the social sciences had settled into broad agreement about it. The familiar fact, Sellars endorses, holds that humans made the transition from the original to the manifest image as progress through a series of stages. On some accounts, this progress followed natural or historic laws. Sellars adds a normative or even ethical dimension when he makes the following claim about community, about human community. Once the primitive tribe, it is currently almost the brotherhood of man, sounds a bit hopeful to me, and is potentially the republic of rational beings. He has in mind something like Kant's kingdom of ends, in which each person, every person, is treated only as an end in themselves and never as a means to an end. Sellars clearly views this development as one of progress. We have emancipated ourselves from myth and superstition. Our ability to stand up against mythical traditions by appealing to reason and evidence began in fits and starts, but after working through the stages of myth and religion, it became a way of life with the emergence of science. That's the progress view. Okay, I'm not there yet. Sellars was aware, I'm more or less there. Sellars was aware that some thinkers express ambivalence about this vision of human progress. For example, Ernst Cassirer argued that language, science, and myth are coordinate symbolic forms that each continue to make positive contributions to our understanding of ourselves and our world. In his 1949 review of Cassirer's Language and Myth, Sellars finds this idea extremely implausible. Others claim we have not progressed beyond myth, but rather this form of progress, this idea of progress, is itself a myth, and that the myth of this progress is a trap. The opening section of Adorno and Horkheimer's Dialectic of Enlightenment contends that myth becomes enlightenment. that we are not on a path to a kingdom of ends, but mired in delusion when we make all forms of knowing subordinate to the scientific image. Under the influence of these and other critiques, the progress view, social scientists have largely abandoned it. Today, it is widely accepted that the transformation leading from the original to the manifest image and the scientific images, and manifest and scientific images, was not inevitable. Rather, it was a specific, contingent, historical transformation. If there is still value in Sellars' project, we need to know our way around the special sciences of our own time well enough to update the original and manifest images and explain the transition between them. In the following 2 sections, I'm going to draw on the work of historians and anthropologists to update Sellars' ideal types and consider the significant role that the invention of coinage seems to have played in the transition. I'll return at the end to consider some implications for the future of the conceptual framework of persons. In his 2019 book, Unearthly Powers, Alan Strathern draws on sociology, anthropology, philosophy, and a wealth of historical literature, effectively updating the original and manifest image ideal types. He calls his update of the original image immanentism and his update of the manifest image transcendentalism. On his view, transcendentalism appears during what Karl Jaspers called the axial age, beginning sometime after 800 BCE. Okay. On Strathern's account, immanentism is, quote, the result of universal features of the human mind. Immanentism holds that the world plays host to supernatural forces and beings with whom we must interact in order to flourish. They include, quote, ghosts, spirits, demons, ancestors, gods, and the indwelling inhabitants of totems, masks, fetishes, and features of the landscape. To avoid the cultural baggage of terms like spirits, ghosts, etc., Strathern calls them metapersons. Metapersons are persons in that they have motivated agency, just like us, but they're not present to the senses in the way that ordinary people are, and they usually progress at greater range of powers. For humans to succeed in their endeavors, they typically must win over or evade or appease or overpower metapersons. Here are some key features of immanentism that Strathern lays out, which is what's on the screen. Immanentist cultures attribute personhood promiscuously to a wide range of entities. Immanentist cultures embrace a monistic cosmology. Nature, society, and the supernatural are all inseparably fused into a single cosmos. It's a monism. The purpose of immanentist practices is to access supernatural powers to enable human flourishing in the here and now. So immanentism largely ignores the afterlife, unlike transcendentalist cultures. The afterlife is uninteresting or unimportant. Immanentist morality is communal and local and tends to be left unsystematized. Morality is bound up with our everyday norms about how to live well. Immanentist cultures approach their relations with metapersons not in terms of ethics, but rather in terms of power. Metapersons can be terrifying, merciless, wrathful, violent, petty, jealous, irritable, deceitful. They're untrustworthy and require constant appeasement. Graeber has this line, David Graeber has this line somewhere where he says, you know what they're exactly like? They're exactly like divinized kings, divine kingship. People you cannot trust, who are willful and have too much power over us. But they are usually used to grasp, in immanentist cultures, features of nature, the forces of nature that we live and die by, as Marshall Salins points out. Immanentist religiosity tends to be empirical, pragmatic, and experimental. It demands tangible results. When you deal with metapersons, you want something in return. Lastly, immanentist religions are marked by dynamism, mutability, orality, and continuous revelation. It's important to recognize that Strathern is not only talking about hunter-gatherer societies, which maybe that's what you're imagining. His claim is that every human culture was immanentist until the axial age, including enormous complex civilizations with massive bureaucracies. Politically, some were inclusive and egalitarian and democratic, while others were authoritarian, violent, slave-holding nightmares, basically. Vastly different immanentist cultures invented different forms of art, architecture, urban planning, agriculture, astronomy, writing, math, and money. Before I move on to Strathern's account of transcendentalism, I want to talk about money in immanentist cultures. So Richard Seaford gives a really nice overview of just money in general, in all of its forms. Money in general, it's valued and stored as a means to meet social obligations in exchange for and payment. It's quantified, and then it takes the form of functionally equivalent countable units. It provides a measure of value of other things, and it's generally acceptable in trade for the kinds of things that it is used to value. So on this definition, money is widespread. Tons of different cultures have had some version of this. But immanentist cultures in particular, as Seaford argues, have their money in immanentist cultures tend to have these additional specific qualities. Immanentist money has value by virtue of its intrinsic practical or aesthetic material qualities. Gold, silver, magnificent materials that don't degrade with the elements, etc. Different kinds of shells, all kinds of things that are valued for their aesthetic properties. Immanentist money tends to be invested with ritual or cultural meaning, and its merely instrumental transactional use is limited by cultural norms. And third, immanentist money is not universally exchangeable. It can only be used in exchange for specific things under specific circumstances prescribed by the culture. The general idea is that immanentist societies tend to use money to strengthen social bonds and restrict uses of money that weaken them. Okay, transcendentalism. On Strathern's account, immanentist tendencies universally influence human cultures, including transcendentalist cultures. But transcendentalism, by contrast, is not universal. It's a contingent cultural pattern. Again, this is the manifest image now. On Strathern's account, it is neither a higher stage of cognitive achievement nor an inevitable or natural feature of human maturation. Here are some widely shared features Strathern finds among transcendentalist traditions. He makes the point that not every transcendentalist tradition has all of these qualities, but they're markers, let's say, of transcendentalist traditions. Transcendentalism bisects the cosmos into the present mundane world and a higher transcendent realm of existence, whether it's heaven or Platonic forms or whatever. The mundane world here and now is defined by transience, corruption, unsatisfactoriness, and negligibility. By contrast, the transcendental sacred world is pure, superior, but distantly radical and unknowable, and only attainable by liberation or salvation. Transcendentalism establishes the historical singularity of primary revelation and a closed canon of foundational texts. Transcendentalism restructures religious activity around explicit universal ethical codes that govern the interior lives of individuals. You can think of Nietzsche's critique of slave morality here, right? The upshot is a, quote, war with human nature such that normal human appetites are ruthlessly problematized. Transcendentalism is offensive, existing in permanent tension with competing ideas and worldviews, including immanentist cultures and latent immanentist tendencies. It, quote, aspires to ideological hegemony, challenging competing visions of reality in jarring and combative ways, and defaming them as false or evil. To this end, transcendentalist cultures open a distance between how things seem to be and how things actually are. The difference between appearance and reality. This is the birth of philosophy as a distinct practice. Not that immanentist cultures didn't do philosophy, but philosophy is bound up with religion and other social practices. It's philosophy, economics, religion are not separated out into distinct practices in immanentism, but they are, and they become so in transcendentalist cultures. The resulting cultures are, quote, highly charged, combative, sophisticated, and battle-hardened against philosophical onslaught. Quote, engineered to engage in and provoke intellectual competition and debate. Thriving in, quote, epistemological crisis, social upheaval, and multicultural challenge. I mean, that's the very picture of doing philosophy, right? Okay, transcendentalist cultures. Strathern considers Buddhism and Christianity to be the two most straightforward exemplars of this ideal type. But he also includes forms of Islam, Judaism, Jainism, Hinduism, Sikhism, and perhaps, he says, Neo-Confucianism. He also counts the development of philosophy in ancient Greece as a non-religious form of transcendentalism. The cultures and societies these religious and philosophical movements gave rise to remain with us today. They are us. This is the point. Strathern draws on Charles Taylor and others to show how our modern secular manifest image is a product of transcendentalism, including the striking resurgence and reinforcement of transcendentalism in the Protestant Reformation and the full-bore disenchantment of the world through colonialism, the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, and the emergence of capitalism. So a part 2 of this paper would be looking at that the capitalist transition, the fall into money, commodity, money prime, right? But this, what I'm trying to get at in this paper is the original institution of the commodity money commodity circuit. Okay, so what's transcendentalist money then? Earlier I gave Seiferd's definition of immanentist forms of money. Transcendentalist money is coinage, essentially. Money counts as coinage if the state or some administrative institution is involved in its production and circulation. It's minted, meaning specifically that it is metal stamped with excess exchange value over and above the value of the metal itself. And 3, it is widely used for measuring the value of other things. And its acceptability for trade becomes largely unrestricted, so that it displaces traditional ways of distributing goods and institutes the predominance of markets. In other words, coinage turns everything into an actual or potential commodity. For the first time, this is happening again, in the axial age. The appearance of coinage is nothing less than the original institution of what Marx called the CMC circuit. Okay, Strathern's update of the manifest image historicizes it as a result of contingent social and material circumstances, but is neutral with respect to what caused this transition. Strathern doesn't give an account. I emailed him the other day, what do you think of this money idea? Was money a major cause of this transition? And he gave me, he's ambivalent. He's open to the idea. They included it as worth mentioning in a recent volume that they edited, him and a co-editor, but he's not all in on it. I'm going to push it as far as I can in this paper. I think it's worth exploring. It doesn't have to be the whole coinage doesn't have to be the whole explanation of this transition. No historian would sign on to a single cause of such a complicated thing. But the point is that it's overlooked. A satisfying explanation of this transition from the original to the manifest image should make sense of the fact that this transition was historically unique, transforming this cosmological, metaphysical, and ethical outlooks of different societies in similar ways. It spawned several world religions and brought philosophy into the world as a distinct practice. In Sellars' language, it ruptured the stasis of the original image and radically altered the conceptual framework of persons such that today only humans count as persons. What force on earth could institute such novel and dramatic changes? I'm going to draw on Graeber and Richard Seifert to sketch an argument that one important, largely overlooked cause of this transition is the appearance of coinage. In other words, the manifest image is the numismatic image of humans in the world. That's hence my title. The idea is that coinage is a kind of progress trap. We embrace it to solve problems, but then we cannot escape the devastating new problems it creates. Our entrapment reverberates across the ages, from the ringing anvil of the first mint of Miletus, the first Greek city to mint coins, to the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange. It's the entire history of from then to now. In debt the first 5,000 years, Graeber notes the same axial age transformations in Greece, China, and India that Strathern explores, and emphasizes the remarkable coincidence that in every case the sociocultural transformation coincides with the appearance of coinage. Graeber writes, the core period of the axial age, the lifetimes of Pythagoras, Confucius, and the Buddha, correspond almost exactly to the period in which coinage was first invented. What's more, the three parts of the world where coins were first invented were also the very parts of the world where those sages lived. In fact, they became the epicenters of axial age religious and philosophical creativity. The kingdoms and city-states around the Yellow River in China, the Ganges River in northern India, and the shores of the Aegean Sea. Again, in Miletus, it's not just Pythagoras, that's Thales and Anaximander and a third guy whose name I'm forgetting right now, but the pre-Socratics. We're all there, living in the midst of the invention of coinage. Okay, according to Graeber, a similar pattern played out in all three regions. Plunder from warfare and the use of slavery and mining leaves some city-states with large quantities of bullion, which is purified precious metals. As this excess bullion gets distributed through traditional centralized practices, it's cut up into standard weights and measures for use in markets. Following experiments with stamping bits of metal to indicate their value, city-states monopolize this practice for their own benefit, minting coins in temples with symbols of the city's authority and reputation and then distributing them. The demand for coinage grows as city-states use it to pay mercenaries and require it for all payments due to the city, taxation, ultimately making markets an essential feature of life and making coinage indispensable for inhabitants to meet their subsistence needs. It becomes a matter of life and death to have money. The upshot is a violent, quote, military coinage slavery complex driven by competition among city-states. It's a complex in the sense that pursuit of any one of these things requires or involves pursuit of the other. They're self-feeding and they create an inescapable dynamic. Seaford explores the implications of this change through the distinction between long and short-term transactional orders found in many immanentist societies, a distinction analogous to that between the sacred and the profane. Long-term transactional orders, such as aristocratic gift exchange, are centralized and carry symbolic and ceremonial meaning. They invoke the sacred to bestow honor and reinforce social bonds and cosmic order as static and timeless. They're a way of redistributing the goods of society that effectively bolsters social stability and an essential means of social reproduction in immanentist societies. Seaford is specifically thinking of Homeric Greece. Short-term transactional orders help to facilitate the mere appropriation of goods, often for pleasure or competition, often using money, without ceremonial or symbolic meaning. However, this form of transaction is restricted and subordinate, and any use of it that disturbs the long-term transactional order is censured. Seaford shows how coinage undermined the distinction between long and short-term transactional orders in ancient Greece. Prestigious aristocratic gifts change over time. Spits of sacrificial meat prominent in Homeric Greece are replaced by just the spits themselves, 3-foot-long iron sticks. Yeah? So giving meat on sticks, that's how to honor somebody. And then everyone realizes, well, they're not going to stick around, meat rots. You want an enduring symbol of the fact that you've been honored. So the spits themselves came to be symbolic representatives of being honored, right? So you start, instead of, you don't need to put the meat on the spit anymore to honor somebody. You just give the spit. And then when states begin minting coins, they replace the symbolic use of spits with coins. And it's for this reason that Greek coins are named after the spits. Obols, a single coin, and drachma, a handful or 6 iron spits. The association with symbolic meaning of spits helps to establish the legitimacy of this new technology. Seaford is obsessed with the question of, like, well, why would anyone accept coinage? It claims to be worth more than it is. Everyone knows what the value of a hunk of silver according to the standard measure is. Why were we going to accept that it's worth more than that? He thinks it's parasitic on centralized distribution of honor and goods that comes through obols, the spits. Yet as coinage becomes universal, and a measure of exchange value that turns all things into commodities, happens over time, its profanity, its belonging to the profane world of mere commerce, mere exchange in the marketplace, its profanity robs the long-term transactional order of its sanctity, and its power to bolster social stability collapses. So in other words, long-term transactional orders collapse in the presence of coinage over time. We lose the ability to bolster the fabric of society in that way, and come to rely on market systems to structure and bolster society. The introduction of coinage also exacerbates political turmoil. The military coinage slavery complex drives expansionist warfare to secure the wealth of the city. And while the use of coins disperses unqualified economic power into the pockets of ordinary citizens, it's a quote from Seaford, this power is also a trap, accelerating wealth accumulation, leading to corruption, exploitation, and endless cycles through oligarchy and tyranny. I now read Plato's Republic in entirely different terms, understanding this history and understanding the cycles of debt exploitation and oligarchy and democracy as a solution, originally to debt exploitation and then to debt exploitation under conditions of coinage, and then the inevitable product of tyranny arising out of that. The tyrant is the one who amasses wealth for himself above all and for everything else, and coinage supercharges this problem. Okay, how am I doing for time?
Well, maybe a minute. If you want any time for Q&A.
Okay, I'm going to skip that bit then. Okay, so let me close by returning to Sellars and retracing my steps. I began by pointing out that for Sellars, the conceptual framework of persons, which is to say our grasp of what counts as a person or an agent, plays an essential functional role in the structuring of human communities. However, as Sellars shows, it changes over time. Replacing Sellars' original image with immanentism and the manifest image with transcendentalism reveals this change in the conceptual framework of persons to be historically contingent. I sketched an outline for an argument that the development of coinage played a significant role in collapsing the coherence of immanentism and creating the conditions for transcendentalism. If such an account holds up, the reason we don't experience the world as full of agency, personhood, intentionality is in large part because we belong to this 2,600-year-old expansionist militaristic tradition that makes exploitation inevitable, which it was not under the manifest image. It was common but not inevitable. And the possession of money is a matter of life and death. All this matters for Sellars' project in the Philosophy and Scientific Image of Man, and for Marx, who wrote in The Holy Family that if man is shaped by his surroundings must be made human. It matters for Sellars because his call to join the manifest and scientific images in a stereoscopic vision becomes a dubious way to overcome our alienation from nature or achieve a republic of rational beings. It's not at all clear that the wholesale restriction of personhood and agency to humans as the result of the CMC circuit is in the best interest of building a thriving human community. And it matters for Marx because a democratic socialist future with a more humane and dignified way of distributing the goods of society will need to subordinate and restrict our use of money. Engels has a specific line on this. If we achieve this, we should not expect the conceptual framework of persons to remain static. We should not police the resurgence of a non-human personhood and agency if we see it contributing to human thriving. I have no idea what the future looks like. I have no idea what should count as persons, but the point is that we can't police it from the outset. Again, on a Sellarsian account, the only relevant criterion for judging the conceptual framework of persons, the shape that it takes in our society, is whether it facilitates the living of properly human lives. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, session was supposed to end at 13:15, but I think we have some time for questions. So, there's a very engaging talk, so please go ahead. And, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, of course.
So I like everything, but I worry a bit about the historical framework. So I find it important to I don't know, but Marx and Engels often say that there was private property in ancient Greece and so on, but it was not the thing that they have in mind when they speak of capitalism. It wasn't widespread enough. It was had a specific function and so on. so you seem to say like there is this change from the pre-axial to the axial age and so on. That's like what immanentism and transcendentalism denotes. That's like thousands of years ago. And Marx and Engels seem to have in mind a change that happened like 250 years ago. And I think it's important to like emphasize that what we have here, like what we associate with private property, money, capitalism, and all of that isn't actually old. It's not human nature. It's not ancient. It's not thousands of years old. It is a recent thing that like takes a lot of weight off that. And you seem to make that more difficult by saying like it's actually new, like has old roots. So
yeah, fair enough. So I don't want to conflate the two transitions, and I think it's important to talk about I mean, I'm not trying to undermine that distinction. I just want to point out that it'd be easy to think, and I think it was often thought, that not everything up to that was natural, but that we lose sight of the coming into being of the CMC circuit, which is itself a form of alienation, even in the absence of the MCM prime circuit. That's what I'm trying to bring out. So I don't want to conflate the distinction between those two things. And a proper treatment of this, in the larger project that I'm trying to develop, needs to give an account of that distinction as well. Because the switch from CMC to MCM prime is obviously destructive I mean, I completely agree, destructive in all the ways that Marx and Engels were trying to bring out. But also what's interesting, and again, I'm saying I'm going to undermine myself. I do think the distinction is important, but MCM prime was present in then too. It just wasn't the definitive feature of the marketplace. The reason MCM prime is part of an axial age development is because the very act of stamping money, which is carved up bits of metal, and turning it into a coin, and assigning it exchange value in excess of the use value, is already turning M into M prime, which is the heart and the essence of MCM prime. Just the very act of stamping a coin is an MCM prime action. And then there's also, with Aristotle, this famous story about Thales in Miletus, where coins were first stamped in Greece. His people around him in the community were like, what is this philosophy you're doing? We're all doing marketplace money, making rich. What good is philosophy? And the famous anecdote is Thales' response to this is like, all right, I'll show you that philosophy is worthwhile. And he uses his knowledge of nature to predict an incredible olive harvest. You guys all know this story. And so what does he do? He takes money and rents in advance all of the olive presses he can, so that come harvest time, when there's a massive demand over and above what any of the owners of the presses anticipated, he can charge more money. That is MCM prime. So MCM prime has been there all along, but the transition, and I have to tell a fuller story of this obviously, but the transition that Marx and Engels were worried about is the one where MCM prime becomes the essential and inescapable use of the marketplace, whereas prior to that it was only a thing that people could do. But yes, this distinction is very important to answer your question. Yes?
It seems to me like there's a strong parallel between the outline giving up the development of kind of these different images and...
Sir, can you speak up a tiny bit louder?
Oh yeah, sure, sorry.
Thanks.
So I was just saying that I was noticing during your talk when you were talking about the distinctions between the various kind of images with Sellars, that it seems like there's this connection that could be made possibly in terms of with like dialectical development, in terms of the development of like the means of production and things like that. It seems like there's a similar thing going on with that in the original image in terms of and leading to the manifest and so on. I think in terms of, it's something you often run into with any of these regression things really I'm thinking about. And so I wonder if you think that some of your work is going towards the aim of trying to maybe be a little bit more precise about that. It feels like whenever there's these kind of histories that are developed dialectically and there's kind of things that arise out of there, there's always this question of like, well, you know, it's like the evolutionary question, like how, you know, when was it born, when did it transition, you know, it's kind of like if this social form or whatever, you know, gives birth to something else, like is it like born pregnant, so to speak, or where does that come from? Do you feel like you have any insight into that?
I think you're absolutely right that an account like this should get more precise about the dialectical development of these different kind of forms. I don't know that I've done that today, but I do think, and this is why I think you make a good point, to give the kind of account that I'm hoping to give, I absolutely need to get precise. And that will require drawing on a lot of anthropological and historical material to do so. I think somebody like Alan Strathern is a good exemplar of doing that carefully. In his book, Unearthly Powers, which is what I was drawing on for this immanentist, transcendentalist distinction, I think he does a good job of that. So yeah, I agree that an account like this should aim at that kind of precision. I'm just not quite there yet. Yeah. Oh, in the very back corner, I think your hand was first.
Yeah, this isn't something I personally thought about that much, but I thought it was super interesting. And I came across recently the idea of the economist Sylvia Giselle and the idea of expiring money, that a big part of the problem with this kind of system is the fact that money doesn't expire. And you might think that one part of the historical development is the fact that we have made money more and more robust against expiry, because even with physical coins, right, they can get lost. And so, whereas if when money's in these kind of virtual bank accounts, it has that kind of real permanence that separates it from the process of expiry, I guess. And I just wondered how much you think that kind of plays into the sort of story you're telling.
So I don't know anything about expiring money, but that sounds
Well, it's really controversial. He thinks that that's part of the problem, is that because money doesn't go off,
yeah.
why we sort of save it and we don't, like, it gets detached from the economy of needs in that way.
Right, and leads to wealth
Yeah, exactly.
accumulation, and which pulls it out of circulation, and yeah, that's fascinating. I think I'm not sure what to make of it, but I can see how, like, because I am trying to wrap my head around like what the future of money could be in a less exploitative society. And yeah, I mean, the notes putting expiration dates on money, I mean, is inflation, is that also just inflation?
Yeah, I guess how inflation changes whether or not money does expire or not in that way, yeah.
But we don't want the dynamics of the marketplace to dictate inflation or deflation. We want to decide for ourselves to structure money in such a way that it makes, it's more, it undermines opportunities for exploitation or something like that.
There was a couple of cases where people have tried this on small scales. I think it's obviously never been a large scale thing, but there are examples of that might be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. That's absolutely worth looking into. Thanks. Do we have time for one more?
We can take it. We're cutting it into lunch.
I don't want to cut it in everyone's lunch. Are you guys all really hungry? And okay. Okay. Oh, yeah.
Thanks. That was great. But isn't there also, you mentioned yourself that in the immanentist conception of personhood, these superhuman forces or agencies are seen as capricious, often cruel, malevolent, despotic, whereas in the transcendentalist kind of conception, all those factors may be present, but there's also kind of there seems to be a significant, there's not just a restriction, there's also kind of a refinement of the conception of personhood, so that perhaps notions of responsibility and obligation are added or factored on top of this the originary image, so that in your conclusion, when you talk about how it might not be desirable to police attributions of personhood, could you say perhaps, is there not something, for all its kind of horrible and unpleasant aspects, the transcendentalist image would also have contributed something. So the point would not be simply to relax, to reinstate the kind of the original image conception.
Thank you for this is a really important question. So thank you for asking it. So for one thing, picture an immanentist society. So the question is like, if I can put it really glibly, the question is like, we don't want to go back to the bad aspects of immanentist extension of personhood to all kinds of things everywhere. And I agree with that, but I also think we don't even have to worry about that. We're not going backwards. We don't go back in time. I think, for one thing, the immanentist cultures that are not subjected to human strict hierarchies, but are more egalitarian and open, their conception of metapersons as having all of these attributes that are typically associated with divinized kings, it's almost like they're placeholders to make it impossible for humans to take on those roles. It is enough that the forces of nature are grasped through those terms. There's no room to let a human being in to occupy that kind of position. It's enough to deal with the forces of nature that are, the capricious and despotic and all those kinds of things. And it turns out to be a useful way for humans to grasp the forces of nature. It's not the only way. It's not, and there's no normative claim that we ought to, but that's just what they were doing. But in terms of looking forward, I actually think I'm interested in the possibility of atheism that's not a transcendentalist atheism, but an immanentist atheism. And Strathern thinks that our cultures remain shot through with immanentist tendencies. So it's not like immanentism is gone. And I think Sellars gives us one option for this. And I'm not saying this is the only option, but Sellars' option for this is in joining the manifest and scientific images, we're not, the fundamental thing is to treat one another as persons. It's not that we have a whole ontology for that. Ontology belongs to the scientific image. But who or what we treat as members of the community or entities with rights, this can be extended through our laws and how we act and behave, such that rivers can count as persons, which is a thing that happened a couple of years ago in Quebec. Dolphins count as persons and other, there's all manner of ways in which we can extend agency and personhood without having to worry about the despotism that can take when it's unhinged, let's say. So it's not a commitment. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm not worried about that, because the extension of personhood to non-human things should be pursued as a way of improving the form of life that we live. And there's a way to do that, but we shouldn't do it in such a way that undermines our ability to thrive.